welcome everyone. So thank you all for joining us for this post-WWDC webinar where we are going to talk about basically what has been announced, what are our reactions, is it what we expected, is the reality better or worse than what we would have liked to be announced. So I can see a lot of people joining, which is awesome and amazing. Before we get started, I'm just going to say just a few words on how we are going to organize this session. So on Zoom, you can see you have a chat. So on the chat, please speak amongst yourself, introduce yourself to others. Yeah, you can just say whatever you want. And you also have a Q&A feature. And this feature, this part of Zoom, you can use it to ask a question to any one of us. And we're going to be actively monitoring this part so that we can answer your question basically as soon as possible. And this way we can have like a good conversation, not only between ourselves, but also with everyone who is watching. That being said, you've also seen that this webinar, so it has been brought to you by Bitrise. So big thank you to Bitrise for organizing this event. If you want to follow them, follow what they do, so they do CI/CD for mobile, but they also organize quite regularly this kind of webinar, so you can go and follow their Twitter account. This way you will also get access to the replay of this session in a few days. And that being said, well, I think it's more than enough time for me to start and ask the people, the great people we have here, to introduce themselves and maybe to tell us in one sentence what is the one thing that they are most excited about after the WWDC week. So, well, starting maybe with you, Anastasia.
Sure. Hi, hello everyone. My name is Anastasia. My nickname is Vixentile, and you know, I'm all about security, cryptography, yada yada. So I think I'm gonna speak a lot about and privacy, of course, a lot about these things. Probably the most exciting thing for me was it was not introduced during keynote, but I've noticed some new APIs in CryptoKit, cryptographic libraries. So I really like that.
That's interesting indeed. And yeah, Ellen, I was about to say it.
Hi, I'm Ellen Shapiro. I work for Apollo GraphQL. I've been working on the iOS SDK for the last couple of years, and I'm moving into a developer relations position. Because of that, I was planning on doing some documentation rewrite. So I was really excited to see DocC, because that's going to help me a lot.
Maybe Paul?
I think for me, it's got to be the new concurrency work in Swift. It's just massive, and it's so much fun to experiment with and to rethink the way we've built apps so far to take advantage of it. So I'm busy doing a lot of work around that right now. Hopefully it'll land shortly on my site, Hacking with Swift. Until then, it's mostly on my Mac and with early reviewers.
I agree. It was a big risk and impressive the amount of work they were able to put together in such a short amount of time. Like the people at Apple, they worked hard and they worked like smart also.
That's why they earn the big bucks, Vincent.
That makes sense. And finally, Donny.
Yes, hi, Donny, for everybody who doesn't know me. I think I'm definitely on board with the concurrency stuff. I am all in on that, reading all the proposals. They make a lot more sense now that I have seen the WWDC videos on it too. So that's really nice. And also I'm very excited that they added CloudKit sharing to persistent CloudKit container. It was sort of something I was expecting because they had the shared option on your store already, but it just didn't do anything. So I'm very happy to see that it finally does something in iOS 15. So that are two things that I'm super excited about.
And hey, folks, there's lots of folks here in the chat. Go ahead and tell us your number one favorite thing too, because you're following along. You've watched stacks of videos too. So go ahead and pick out your favorites in the chat.
And so I guess from my side, I'm not going to be very original. I'm going to say also I'm very excited about concurrency, but what I really enjoyed is just how well they managed to explain the topic, which is a complicated topic, and the videos are super clear. And for having trying to do this kind of videos earlier with the betas, I felt the challenge, and I think they've been very good at explaining and just making sense of this concurrency feature, which I think is hard for humans to understand.
Yeah, I love the behind the scenes one in particular. That one, like, I don't think I have understood GCD as well as I did after watching that in-depth Swift concurrency video, which is surprising probably, but I really, really thought that was so good.
I think perhaps we can agree to disagree. Because
really,
I mean, I enjoyed the talks very much. I think they've presented a lot of important information. But what Apple haven't done, and this is classic Apple, is given any suggestions on, well, here's a great place for combine, and here's a great place for async await, and here's a great place for. They give us all this stuff, explain how it works, and then it's basically, oh, your use case is unique and down to the context, and we'll give you no guidance at all on when you might want to use it. But that's part of the fun. Anyway, I'm sure we'll come on to that later on.
they're just leaving plenty of room for you to make content, Paul.
That's true.
Yeah,
That's what it is. It's very kind of them. It's very generous.
I definitely agree with that, though, especially in the combined part. Like, I wonder, sort of, does Apple have an idea of where they think combined fits in this world? Does combined not fit in this world? Like, what is Apple's thoughts on this? I would have loved to sort of learn a little bit about that.
So would Apple. They have no idea either, I think. So
or at least they are not communicating their idea. Maybe internally they know exactly what they're supposed to do with combine, and maybe they have a deprecation date already set. But
so in 3 years, in 3 years, they'll have this dubbed up video like, this is how you were supposed to use combine all along. We didn't tell you. That's 5 years later. Here's what we envisioned.
Well, and I think there's also, talking to people who work at Apple, there's a lot of secrecy between teams, and I think that can make it very difficult to sort of plan some of this stuff. Where, if you don't know that something's coming, you can be like, oh,
exactly.
Oh wait, that does the same thing that we are working on.
Exactly.
What do we do about that now?
We discover the videos, but the people at Apple, they also discover the videos of their colleagues at the same time than us. So
yeah. There were presenters at WWDC where they announced Swift that hadn't seen Swift before. They had no idea it was coming. Like, they just prepared their whole thing and boom, there's Swift.
That must be a weird feeling.
Yeah.
Oh, so we have Abby there saying in the questions. So do you remember when Apple introduced garbage collection in Objective-C? It lasted about a year. Which is true, and I think it never made it to iOS. It was only for macOS, if I remember correctly. I mean, OS 6 at the time. Do you think that's what will happen with Combine?
Maybe.
I don't think so, because I think Combine and Donnie, you had a good article about this. I think Combine and async await are sort of two different things. I think a lot of people have been using async await as sort of or combine as sort of a like let's pretend that we have async await, but it is something where, like, the much more powerful things that you could do with combine in terms of combining streams and in terms of, like, even just deep bouncing and stuff like that, like, that's a bunch of stuff that it's going to take a lot of work for async await to catch up with that, whereas async await does the things that are, like, much more straightforward and makes them simpler. I think it's something similar to the coroutines within Kotlin, which is super similar to async await, at least on the user sides, certainly not on the implementation side, it sounds like. But it is something where, they have sort of the regular coroutines implementation, and then they have, like, all of these additions on top of it that really are built to facilitate more sort of reactive programming. And I think that seems like a reasonable place for Apple to draw the line in terms of what should async await be used for versus what should combine be used for.
Well, yeah. I love your optimism here. I honestly, I cannot see them drawing a line. I don't want to go, like, terrifically old school here, but there's a period of time when Carbon and Cocoa existed together side by side and were both great technologies. And if something happened here but not here, they'd backport or forward port appropriately, and they'd regularly point out that both are great choices. And there was going to be a winner, but Apple didn't want to pick that winner. They wanted the community to try things out and decide for itself what that direction was going to be. And I suspect that's where we are today. They're not going to say, oh yeah, sorry, Combine, we thought it was good for 7 or 8 years internally, released to iOS 13, it's had its time. they're going to wait to see what actually happens and then kind of back the winning horse. That's what it feels like. And that's cool. We're the ones writing most of the Swift code, right? They're still mostly writing Objective-C code. So when it comes to actual practical examples, it's mostly us. So I get that. It makes sense.
Yeah.
I think there's a decent amount of stuff that's written in Swift now, though. Like certainly framework level, there's still a ton of stuff that's in Objective-C, but in terms of like actual internal applications, I think there's a decent amount that's been switched to Swift.
I mean, what shortcuts? The weather app?
Shortcuts.
The weather app.
The weather app, the music app. I know they've talked about. The music app is not insubstantial. So it's it is something where I think, particularly with API stability, there's some things where hopefully there's more stuff that's going to be able to be in Swift. But yeah, you're correct that there's still a lot that's in Objective-C.
Mm.
Isn't the new sharing stuff also in Swift? Like written in Swift entirely, that framework? I think I saw something like that somewhere. I haven't checked.
The framework? That'd be brave. I mean, great. But yeah.
Like I haven't bothered to verify. I just saw it. Like probably a tweet from someone like, hey, is that thing all Swift? So I could have misinterpreted the tweet and be saying weird stuff right now, but who knows?
And what I've seen also is that now some part of iOS 15, small parts, but they are written in SwiftUI. For instance, the Apple Pay pop-up that tells you like this is this card, this address, etc. Almost everything in it is SwiftUI. And while speaking of SwiftUI, I think we all have things about it, but I think, Paul, you must have a lot of things. I remember you did a complete live to discover SwiftUI very shortly after it was announced. So maybe like after doing this live, what do you think like people are enjoying the most? What are the most like awesome features of SwiftUI 3.0?
I think we could talk about specific APIs. We could say, oh, you can do pull to refresh. Oh, you can do UI search controller. Oh, you can do visual effect views and more. But I think there's a bigger picture here that people are only just kind of figuring out, which is that this is the first SwiftUI release where Apple's been happy to say these are now deprecated already, just gone, and replaced with new, more cross-platform friendly APIs, because they're making a concerted effort now to push SwiftUI everywhere, hence shortcuts on macOS, like I said a few minutes ago. And so things like the old alert struct, it's just gone in SwiftUI 3. It's deprecated now. Don't use that anymore. Use a confirmation dialog. Action sheets is gone, because macOS doesn't have action sheets. It's not a thing that exists on macOS, whereas confirmation dialog is a nice woolly semantic name that could mean anything on the actual platform. And so it's a big improvement for cross-platform behaviors. And also things like buttons. Buttons are used in lots and lots of places now. A simple SwiftUI button powers your menus, powers your alerts, your action sheets, and more with button, because we know how that works. We know how it's customized on all the platforms. And so it makes the whole framework simpler and more flexible. And that, I think, is the biggest win this year, is that suddenly there are fewer things to worry about. Oh, will this work on such and such platform or not another platform? They work in many, many more platforms by default, which is fantastic. And that is quite brilliant. And that, plus the way they've added some of the new features to make them, there's no word for it yet, but it's like SwiftUI native is quite brilliant. And visual effect view is a good example of that, because there were lots of UI visual effect view wrappers available for SwiftUI before iOS 15 out there. I had one built on Apple's own stuff, but the other ones available. And they all had a very simple way of thinking. They basically copied the way UI visual effect view worked now in SwiftUI. And the actual iOS 15 visual effect blur they've added, the material support, is astonishingly simple. It's like, wow, they've taken the idea of visual effect view and made it feel like SwiftUI API. And that's really, really powerful. The same is true of pull to refresh or searchable. They've rethought UI search controller or rethought the way the UI refresh controller works. And it's just beautiful. I want to see more of that, more SwiftUI native, SwiftUI idiomatic applications based on let's throw away the ideas behind it and just bring in like, how could this work from scratch? If we were to do this from scratch, how would it look? And those are the biggest wins this year. Apart, I mean, obviously APIs are very nice, but the way of thinking to make it cross-platform, make it native and idiomatic, that's the biggest win for me this year. And my dogs like it too.
Apparently they like it quite a bit. I was curious, you're talking about how the SwiftUI stuff has really evolved to be much more cross-platform. What do you think that bodes for Catalyst?
I think STS, Steve Troughton-Smith, had a brilliant tweet about this, which is that I think, he didn't say these exact words, I'm sort of putting words into his mouth a little bit. I think SwiftUI fans kind of want Catalyst to fail. Which is a very strange place to be. We're like, well, I've backed the SwiftUI horse, therefore UIKit must die, Catalyst must die. And at this point, unless they've done some dramatic work in Monterey, lots of apps for macOS are built using UIKit plus Catalyst. News and home and stocks and similar. They're all UIKit and Catalyst. So Catalyst still has a very, very good future in front of it. I obviously think SwiftUI is a better solution, but it's still missing all sorts of things. And so it's not a drop-in replacement of Catalyst even today, because you get more control, more flexibility with Catalyst. And I think Big Sur was the turning point for that, because before Big Sur, remember Catalina, it was like, that's obviously a UIKit app. Like that feels like an iPhone app running on my Mac. It's not quite the same. Whereas in Big Sur, suddenly they obviously transformed the UI to look more like an iPad, so it all fits in just as well. So I think Catalyst still has a very good future. Talking at least 2 or 3 years of good Catalyst future. And then I hope SwiftUI will be feature complete.
As someone who works with mostly binary data and security and other things, I haven't touched UI in several years. And I'm so happy. I mean, I am listening to all these conversations about Catalyst, SwiftUI, all the things. And I'm like, oh, I don't need to watch those videos. I mean, yeah, I'm really happy these things exist, right? I have my share of videos to watch, but yeah, it's just, a bless. Like ignorance is a bless,
I feel the same way about UIKit, sadly. I haven't got the brain space to do SwiftUI new features and UIKit new features. So I've basically everything after about iOS 13.5 or so has kind of just missed me over. Bits of iOS 14, the bits I care about. But things like from last year, they had the UI collection view lists. So you can make tables in collection view. And there's a whole new API for doing that. And it's 3 times the work than the old UI table view, self or index path kind of API. But annoyingly, they've said, hey, if you want to have a sidebar, like, one of those nice sort of glossy translucent sidebars on macOS, or one of the nice new iPadOS highlighting sidebars, you've got to use a new API. You've got to use a collection view for that. That can't be a table view. And so it's very, very large amounts of work to get a fairly simple layout in iOS 15 these days. Whereas in SwiftUI, list style.sidebar, you're done.
And by the way, I installed like iPadOS iOS 15 on my iPad. I like it, but at the same time, I feel it's slower. I mean, this is beta, and all the things. But if you try to install like iOS 15 beta, do you feel the same? Do you see the same things?
I don't use my iPad as extensively as I bet you do. I haven't seen a huge difference, but then again, I also have a relatively new iPad that I mostly use for like drawing things and making designs for stuff that I'm building. So I haven't really noticed that much of a difference, but I do know that like beta 1 is almost always pretty slow.
Yeah.
I always put something in whatever Slack I'm in for like whatever company I'm working for. It's like, hey, so there's a lot of new shiny stuff, and then you might want to install it. Maybe wait till there's a public beta, because I think there's a lot of people who are just like, but I want the shiny now, and I'm like, I get it. You're not going to want the slow part.
So
I
it's
want
exactly the reason
snow
why.
on my weather app, that bouncing effect, the rain bouncing off.
Yeah.
That's what everyone wants.
Yeah.
That's exactly the reason why I use iPad to experiment with like
Yes.
iOS better. Because I mean, this is my iPad. I love it, but not as much. I'm okay if it suddenly becomes a brick and I will need to spend some
Yeah.
time. I'm fine.
Yeah, I don't like, yeah, that's my thing about putting it on my carry phone is I never put it on my carry phone until it's at least in public beta, because it's like, yeah, if my phone gets bricked, I'm really screwed. So if my iPad gets bricked, it's like, well, that's inconvenient, as you were saying, but it's definitely something where it's like, no, it's like actively dangerous if I have a phone that doesn't work. So.
And speaking of iPad OS, maybe one of the things that I kind of expected to happen and didn't, I was expecting iPad OS to start and diverge more and more from iOS. Now that the iPad has the M1, just as the iMac, I was kind of expecting it would start to find its own way, but it still feels like a different name, but for just a slightly different version of iOS.
I think maybe one of the places that we're seeing that diversion is the way that they've made some of the multitasking stuff a lot more accessible.
That's right.
That like, which is huge, because like I could never get some of the gesture-based stuff to work the way that it was supposed to. I have like little sausage fingers, so I don't know like what the problem is, but it's one of those things where I think that might be a place where we're seeing that diversion start. I do agree that I was expecting to see more diversion.
Maybe for next year. But now we can build.
I'm hideously lazy. I just call it all iOS. Honestly, I say iPad OS very, very rarely. I just say iOS, and people know exactly what I mean.
Yeah, your dog just howled when you tried to say iPad OS. So.
This is a good indicator. I actually seen iPad OS only as a like marketing term.
Exactly.
Yeah, in Tamil, since it's like cryptographic library I maintain, we basically, when I heard iPad OS, I put it in the docs everywhere. We support iOS and iPad OS. But then I understood it's just a term, so it doesn't, change. No changes there, no differences. I mean, from like encryption perspective. So I just removed it everywhere. Just left iOS and macOS, and that's all.
Yeah, from running a library, like you just you make it support iOS, and it supports both iPhone OS and iPad OS. Like that's the end of the story.
Yeah,
I think we have now all just said iPad OS more than every Zoom call ever.
We need like to calculate. This the game I was playing during the WWDC keynote. So yeah, I was like calculating the amount of times they pronounce encryption, security, and privacy.
I hope you weren't doing that as a drink. Yeah, I was gonna say I hope you weren't doing that as a drinking game, because you would have been on the floor.
As a drinking game. So yeah.
Oh no.
Well, my calculation starts quite precise, but keynote was really long, so I'm not sure, right, if I calculated all the entries, like all the words, but I got like 19 times per keynote. And the keynote was like 19 minutes. So it's like almost every 5 minutes, they will tell an encryption, end-to-end encryption, security, privacy. This is a cool game. Next time I decided to improve the rules for the next year. So I will like drink like the same rules, like encryption, security, yada, yada, I will drink something. But when they say like awesome, gorgeous, worldwide, I will drink
best in class.
Water. Yeah,
just water. You gotta have that to balance it out. Yeah, I was gonna say, I hope you're not planning to drink every time somebody is a bunch of Americans say the word awesome, because we say it every 5 seconds.
So yeah, the water. Yeah, let's see how it goes next year. But it was fun this year. I mean, I enjoyed keynote more than I thought.
I mean, I would have too if I had 19 shots of alcohol. So.
And maybe a question I wanted to ask you, Donny. So you've written books on Combine and core data. So for the Combine part, we've seen that not much has changed, but for core data, like, has there been some big changes this year?
Mostly around CloudKit syncing. So you can now share records with other people through NS persistent CloudKit container, which is really cool because it makes it works much better than their previous attempt at core data in the cloud. because this one actually seems to work well as far as my experiences go. And otherwise, they added some support for async await, kind of allowing you to run asynchronous tasks and returning stuff from it. But due to Chordata's very restrictive threading model, it's not like you can suddenly make it super easy to fetch things on the background and return them to the foreground, unless you fetch object IDs instead of full-blown managed objects. So that's sort of as far as I have seen at this point. I have yet to dig in deep to figure out if there's anything I have missed. So if any of the other panelists know of anything big I have not called out just now, do tell me. Otherwise, it's just Apple's been sort of steadily making small improvements to Chordata, and I hope they keep that up.
Yeah, and the fact that, I mean, they are still keeping core data, there is no Swift data being introduced, that's still an information. Yet. We'll see. Maybe.
I think Donnie's the only person who wants to see more core data improvements. The rest of us want to see it die in a fire.
I honestly think they're going to keep improving on it. It would be strange for them to rip it out at this point and be like, this is a completely new thing while they're still maintaining it. I would at least expect like 1 or 2 boring years before they burn it and the same combine, probably throw a combine on.
Yeah, that's fair. I think it's like watching Sprite Kit and Scene Kit go absolutely nowhere for multiple years now. It's pretty clear Reality Kit is where all their attention is. This is the new shiny thing. It'll be a game engine shortly, but right now you've got to use this old stuff instead, and it's a bit sad, really. I mean, just put a bullet in its head. Move on.
I think there's probably too much stuff that's actually based on that. Like, I don't know how they're doing all the stuff in the weather app with all the making the snow bounce and all that, but that may be using various pieces of Sprite Kit or Scene Kit. That
no, it's also SwiftUI. I did it myself. It's really easy actually. They cheat is how they do it. I had the keynote in YouTube and I sort of maximized on my huge screen. I basically watched it back and then copied it exactly in SwiftUI. And it's a canvas and a timeline provider and 2 particle emitters. So there's one particle emitter coming down the way and one firing up the way, and it looks like it bounces. So it's not like the particles exactly hit the thing and then stop. I mean, you could do that. It's not terribly hard to do, but they haven't done that. They've basically faked it by making new particles come off. So
basically the bounces don't line up with the collisions.
Exactly. But you could do that. It's not hard to make that. It's just there's no need to because it works well enough, quite frankly.
Yeah, there's a certain point where you know, unless somebody's looking at it with a magnifying glass, they're not going to see it.
Correct.
And I see some people speaking in the chat and also in the question. So about the online format of WWDC this year, the fact that the sessions, the labs, there are also the lounges online. I think people enjoy them quite a lot, especially like the lounges. So many people like saying on Twitter, they were very glad to have this kind of interaction with people at Apple, and even for people who are not attending WWDC on site. I don't know, like if some of you've managed to attend labs or lounges, and what were your opinions on it?
So I have not attended any labs. I did join in the lounges. Unfortunately, they were never really open at the time where I was at my computer, or available to participate. So I haven't done a lot of that. But I like mostly what I like is the sessions online and the format they chose, because sometimes some of these sessions felt like they had to fill a certain amount of time.
Exactly.
And they got a little bit lengthy. So I like that they made all the videos exactly as long as they needed to be instead. So there's much more condensed information there, which I really like.
Yeah, I really also like the session format, because they're like, you know, short enough. When I see 15-minute session, I'm fine to watch it. I mean, I'm ready to watch. I want to watch it. When I see like 45 minutes, I'm like, 45. Do I have time for 45 minutes right now? No, probably no. And I watch it literally never, you know. So smaller sessions make total sense for me. I mean, I feel like I'm TikTok generation already.
And I also see a lot of people recommending the session Demystifying SwiftUI, which I guess is one of the most popular. And personally, I find it super interesting whenever you want to get started.
Yeah, the sessions are obviously a big win from this format. They're Apple level production quality. Someone said they basically hire a currently out of work TV director, come in, there's clearly a reading from a script in front of them. They are working very carefully to do shots and reshoots and reshoots and more to get it exactly the way it should be, and then slice it together to be perfect. So it's very, very high production quality sessions. The labs are always good, and I really obviously appreciate the fact that everyone can have access to them, which you wouldn't otherwise get in in-person WWDC. The lounges were an attempt, I think, to build a community atmosphere, and it was interesting seeing very mixed success. I was only in 2 of the lounges, 2 of the lounge channels. I took part in many events aside there, but the SwiftUI lounge and the DevTools lounge. And they were very, very different environments. You know, the SwiftUI lounge was wonderful. You interacted directly with the SwiftUI team in a like a watch party, watch along and chat and ask questions, and they reply in the chat straight away. And there's open labs and open hours, and it was very friendly. You actually have fun and make jokes and have responses and more. And it felt like you were having a drink with them, or as close as you could do in a sort of typey sort of Zoom Slack environment. The DevTools lounge in comparison was the complete opposite. You couldn't write in the main chat. You couldn't write in the replies. There was no chance to actually interact with people. And so maybe that was intentional. They figured DevTools would be more interesting or more hard. I'm not sure, but it was so dull at times. I thought this is Slack at its worst. I wanted to just scream, hurry up, answer the damn question. Like occasionally it would go by and it'd be like a question every 5 minutes or so in an open hours lab. Yeah. And it's like, this is just so dull. And so if they copied the SwiftUI lab approach of being interactive and fun and engaging, awesome. There's also 2 other labs I didn't get a chance to go along to, but hopefully they were more fun.
Yeah, the labs were interesting because when you got a lab appointment, you had 1 or 2 Apple developers join you, but for some reason WWDR was telling them not to turn their video on. I have no idea why, and it was really weird because it's like, yeah, hi, welcome to my house, and hello, like, you know, head icons that are just kind of floating there. It was a little weird. I think Paul, a lot of what you were talking about is interesting in terms of like Slack is a tool and it's only as good as what you do with it. It's really something where I unfortunately was not able to get into any of the labs because I was out of, or not labs, the
lounges?
The Slack lounges, thank you, because I was out of town the week that they opened all the registration for that. But it's something where I think this is something that I've seen in a number of different Slacks and a number of different Discords is that I think the level of engagement that you get out of people is the level of engagement that you put into actually working with people. And I think that's something where it sounds like there wasn't really, like, it sounds like the lounges were a little bit of a last minute addition, at least in Apple timeline. And it's something where it doesn't seem like there was a lot of coordination in terms of what the expectations were, in terms of like who should be involved, how much interaction is expected of you. And I think that's something that if they do it again next year, I think that's something they definitely will probably think through a little bit more thoroughly.
If it's any consolation, last year I had 3 or 4 labs. Half of them were not even names. It was just Apple engineer and Apple engineer joined the WebEx call. It was super anonymous and it just felt even weirder. So they've obviously learned from last year, because last year was a bit of a surprise. I guess they were hoping to have it in person last year. This year they've had a whole year to plan. And so the lounges, the pavilions, the new developer app with copy code, all in the video and so forth, much slicker operation this year. So they've done better. Even things like the videos dropping earlier. I think it was 4 hours earlier they dropped this year than last year. Yeah, was huge, because otherwise, it was extremely hard to follow along, and they had some labs running super late at night to help people in various time zones. So they're making improvements slowly.
Yeah, I think the concessions to, hey, not everyone is on Pacific time have been really helpful.
And we also have an interesting remark in the questions. So Abizar is saying, with all the new features announced as being backed by machine learning, is it too late to start picking up on it? Personally, I would say no. And I would also say it's a good thing that machine learning is more and more encapsulated, and we don't have to know about it to use the features, because we are not data scientists. We are not people who know machine learning, we know front end, and it was more a barrier than something useful to have to learn in detail machine learning.
We can agree to disagree again.
Oh, really? I'm curious to know your opinion on the topic.
I think I would argue, I would say, I believe that you're half correct. It's very, very easy to use machine learning to get literally any answer you want. That's one of the amazing things of machine learning and statistics. And what I encourage folks to do is at least learn the bare minimum of what they're trying to do and the correct options. For example, if you said, hey, why would I want to have a linear regression or whatever here? It makes a big difference to the way you get results and the accuracy of results and the meaningfulness of it. If you want to ask someone, look, I'm sorry, my dog's clearly very, very hungry. At least learn the basis of what you're trying to do and how it works. You don't have to learn the fundamentals of how to make these things anymore, because obviously CoreML is doing most of the work for you there. But at least learn what all of these things mean and why they work and go from there. So I don't think it's too late, but at least try and think about what's a boosted tree here or whatever you want to. Why does that term matter? Why do these things work the way they do? And then noodle around to your heart's content, because they have made it very, very easy. And no, it's not too late. It's really not too late to grasp the fundamentals of machine learning, what it's trying to do and how it works and how the options work. I would say takes only about 3 to 4 hours these days, just to get it working, understand, oh, that's why this works, and that's why this works, and similar, and then start making things.
I actually think having waited to dig into ML will probably benefit you, because as Paul said, it's shorter to learn how to do it now because there are way better explainers, because there's so much stuff where in earlier days of ML, you would have to explain literally everything involving ML. And now the places where you can sort of say, okay, like, here's a general summary of what you need to know, but you don't need to know every last horrible detail of it. That's something where I feel like there's a lot better introductory material than there was even a couple of years ago.
Yeah. It's not, you haven't to go very far. If you can explain what a random forest is versus a boosted tree, if you can explain what root mean square error means, you're most of the way to making something useful. That's it. You haven't got to go into the actual mathematics behind the scenes of how the training works and similar. Just get the fundamentals and you're away.
Yeah, you need to learn how to use it rather than how to build it, basically.
It's also a great idea to combine ML knowledge with some other skill. For example, I was recently involved in a project with ML and security. Basically, we were encrypting ML models like TensorFlow, Core ML models with traditional security, traditional crypto, and ML. And this is so rare combination of skills. So if you have like ML skill and someone else, like something else skill, you are a rare person with a rare skills, and you're in a high demand.
Absolutely.
Couldn't agree more, yeah. And I was looking, and there is a very interesting question. So one is saying, since all iOS 14 devices support iOS 15, there is no real reason to build an app for iOS 15 that also supports iOS 14, or is there? And I'm bringing it up because I saw something that it's kind of a change in habit from Apple, is that now users can say, I want to stay on iOS 14 and only get security updates. And that's a big change, basically. Before that, they were just forcing you and even say like nagging you to update.
Yeah, it's an interesting question that I feel like a lot of people are asking this, and in my opinion, it's you cannot really say yes or no to that one, because it really depends, like, who are you trying to reach, what kind of level of control do these people have over devices? Because just because these devices can update does not mean that they will. Like, maybe they're prohibited through some corporate security software that's sort of preventing OS updates from being done. Maybe you're developing things for devices that are in public spaces. Like, nobody's going to go to these devices and update them to iOS 15 as soon as possible. It'll be during some maintenance moment, 6, 7, 8 months from now, where they're like, oh, maybe we should update these someday. And they will eventually. Like, if you want to make apps for these devices, maybe iOS 14 does make sense. So, but if I were to start a new project, just something that I build for people, I don't care if you're on iOS 14, 15, or whatever, I would probably pick 15, if I don't have a specific target audience in mind. It's just my 2 cents.
This is something that we've run into on Apollo, is that we drop support for iOS 9 and 10 and 11 because those are things that are not really used as much. And we had some people who were really upset about that because it's like, yeah, a small percentage of our users are still using 9, 10, 11. But when it comes to how much actual money does that make our company, it's like, oh, that's like my whole salary. And it is something where it's worth remembering that older versions of your application will continue to work on older operating systems. You're not just like immediately leaving money on the floor. It's not just like, all right, we're now going to uninstall this from every device that doesn't use the most recent operating system. I think it is definitely worth thinking about sort of, all right, what is that trade-off? Like, what are pieces that we're going to be leaving behind for older devices if we don't do it? I have definitely found that in terms of how quickly people update, that has reduced pretty significantly over the last few years. Like, it used to be like 80% of iOS devices would be on the new operating system like almost immediately, and that's gone down a fair amount. I feel like it may have coincidentally, it probably coincidentally started around the same time that my parents switched to iOS, but it's definitely something where, that is a demographic where people really don't want to apply updates especially if it's going to be anything that messes with like where anything is. Yeah. People really, really, really do not like that kind of change, especially older people who are used to finding something in one place, and then when it changes, it just means it's much more difficult for them to find something. And I think that is something that is worth considering. Like, who is the audience for your application? Is it a lot of younger early adopters? Is it people who are likely to be very technologically adept, or is it likely to be people who are less technologically adept? And that's really something that's much more about what is your specific audience for your specific app than like sort of anything that you can really throw a general guideline at.
You just reminded me that I'm going to have to make a tutorial on how to use Safari all over again for my parents.
Oh, God. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Oh, no. Sorry.
What I would recommend folks do is at least set your deployment target to iOS 15 briefly, and then put it back down to 40 if you want to. Have a look at what's changing and why. Are there any deprecations? Because you might find things are hard deprecated in 15 and soft deprecated in 14. So you can switch across them now and get part of the way there without breaking your 14 compatibility. Things like navigation bar title and SwiftUI, for example, is now very much navigation title.
Yeah, and speaking of versions and SwiftUI, something
Wait, Vincent, let's continue about iOS 15, because like for me as a user, one of great sets of change for iOS 15 and something that would definitely push me to install iOS 15 like really fast, all these privacy related things. I mean, I especially like this digital ID and wallet. I know that I'm from Ukraine and we will have this like never, I don't know, in the next like dozen years, but still this is still exciting to see, right? Okay, not for me, but still I really like all the things with hiding my email, with tracking those, with cutting those tracking pixels from mail, with private relay, a whole bunch of privacy related user features, account recovery, or like how to transfer your account for someone else if something's gone wrong, right? And I'm invested in that. I'm like, okay, those features are built for me. Yeah, I will wait for iOS 15 and I will install it. Yeah.
And definitely also we can see that Apple every time now privacy and privacy on all the possible ways and forms. That's like a strong choice. And also one session that I wanted to watch and I haven't watched yet is that they are kind of offering a ways now for marketers to have some analytics, but in a way that respects privacy. So I guess differential privacy, these kind of things. But I thought it's a nice way to say to marketers, okay, we are cutting access to something because we think that it doesn't respect the privacy of our user, but still we're kind of offering tools that help you just get your job.
Yeah. And I see from not only from Apple perspective, these changes. So in ad market, in ad tech market, let's put it this way, the new ideas that like some new wave is coming, which is as a user, you need to have control over your data. So we don't ruin ad experience, but now you can control what ads you want to see, yada yada. And Apple is pushing this idea from both from user perspective and for developers from API perspective. So now as a developer, yeah, you can show relevant ads, but you have a better way to do that, like more privacy respectful way. At the same time, another idea there, like the same, as a user, all data is yours. This idea with encryption, right? Apple emphasized a couple of times during keynote that you don't need to collect more data as a developer in the application, more data than you need. You want to try to process everything on device without sending over the network. Only if you need to send it over the network, please encrypt for this user only. You know, these are totally different things, but they all build around the same idea, like giving this user data, like allowing users to control this data and not giving access to it to anyone else, which is very different from how internet works right now.
Yeah, and also we were speaking about maybe like older demographics. It feels like this kind of feature saying iOS is a safe place, and also the new features, for instance, to share health data between family members. It feels like Apple, they really want to have now their ecosystem in place and to try to reach now as many people as possible. Like they've reached the early adopters, they've reached all of the regular people who get tech about 5 to 10 years. Now it's time to get all the people who are hard to convince. It really feels like that's it. The smartphone now, it's for everyone in the population.
I do wonder to what extent their plan is actually so-and-so loves iOS, they're 28 years old, they're cool, they've got money to spend, and they've got an iPad, they've got an iPhone, they've got an Apple Watch, and they're totally bought in. They aren't the problem anymore for Apple. They're not the sales target, right? They want to now get other people. And so I don't know how many other folks did this, but when the Apple Watch introduced fall detection, I'm like, okay, I'm buying one for my parents. Straight away. It was no brainer. It's that simple. Let's go for it. That's a thing I'm just going to do. Same for if they add, glucose in the blood monitoring and similar. That again, just buying for my parents straight away. ECG, bang, instant buy. Sharing health data, again, that's going to benefit a lot of people, particularly like, for example, my grandmother takes a variety of medication. I want to make sure she's taking it correctly and I can follow things well. And maybe my mother would want to watch her health data, for example. So it spreads the ecosystem around by encouraging us to upgrade family members who might not otherwise know about or care about them, perhaps.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. I actually had a doctor appointment when I tried to show my medical data from my Apple Watch. The doctors were not convinced. They were like, what? What is that? You have all these analytics but day by day? Really? Are you okay?
And I'm looking at the clock. I'm seeing that we are getting close to the end of the 1 hour session. There was one question I wanted to ask because I guess maybe many developers have it in mind, related about iOS 15, SwiftUI. It's if you have written an app in SwiftUI, should you now drop iOS 13 and say it's too much work to just like keep it working on this first version of iOS that supported SwiftUI? I'm wondering, like, what's your opinion? Maybe Paul or other people who are using SwiftUI heavily?
I think the initial version of SwiftUI had a very, very small footprint, and that wasn't an accident. That was entirely intentional. They didn't want to have the same problems that Swift had, where they, support everything out of the box and then had to adapt very quickly to support things better. And so the initial SwiftUI was comparatively very small, and even 14s were still comparatively very small, and some would say even 15 is comparatively very small because there's so many things you still cannot do. Rich text in text editor, text fields in alerts. There's still a lot of API coverage that is just not there. And so I would not be surprised if the folks who jumped ship to SwiftUI in iOS 13 are also people who are going to jump to 15 straight away. Because if you were that keen to go SwiftUI in iOS 13, you'll be that keen in 15 as well. You just will. I think folks will upgrade, not only ditching 13, but ditch 14, go straight 15. Honestly, for me, it's simple things like I want the extra 800 SF symbols. It's increasingly powerful SF symbols. There's really, really beautiful things these days. I want things like the new tab view image selection based on OS context. There's little features that make SwiftUI nicer and simpler and easier to use. I kind of want that.
I guess that makes sense. Yeah, if you were like, if iOS 13 was okay for you, then iOS 15 now is also okay for you because your app or your business model, it allows it. So before, yeah.
I was gonna say, unless you were launching a brand new app with iOS 13, and now your business model is like, oh, we have a lot more users than we did when we initially did this. Can we afford to do this? Like that is still something that's certainly doable, but I think it is important to remember, like, by dropping support for a particular operating system, you're not just like casting people off into the sea. They're still going to be able to use the version of the app that they have, and whether that's something that is sufficient for you or not is kind of up to each application. But at a certain point, that's still a trade-off that you have to figure out when to make.
Yeah, and I think like also maybe the big thing is that it's not as much a developer decision. Actually, it's a whole company decision with a lot of business impact. And like you say, like if you are going to drop 10% of your money of the revenue, well, that's usually like a big number, and you just can't do it because finances.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking to close this session, maybe if we had to give like one advice to the people who are listening, what would we recommend that they go and check out and try to learn, like amongst all of the things that have been announced at WWDC? I don't know if someone wants to start, if someone has an idea. I know I still don't have an idea yet, so I hope someone else has an idea.
I've got lots of ideas, but someone else can go first.
And I'll go first and say Swift concurrency behind the scenes. If you want to learn how that stuff works, it's not going to be useful if you want to target anything below iOS 15, but it's interesting either way. It's really interesting to see what they're doing. So
I would say also, like, if maybe like SwiftUI, you haven't started using it, or you're thinking now I can finally like drop everything below iOS 13 and try using it, demystifying SwiftUI, I think it's really great. And it doesn't speak actually about how you should use the basic API, but how you should reason about your code, how you should think about your code. It speaks of things like what's the identity of a view and things like that. And honestly, like I would recommend anyone before getting started with UI now. It's for me, it's a must watch.
I think I actually have documentation to read rather than to watch. The written documentation for sort of how to write better documentation that's included with the doc.c stuff is actually really, really good. Even if you're in a situation where you can't take advantage of doc.c directly. So doc.c only really supports like publishing documentation for public methods, and it doesn't really support publishing documentation for like within an application, but more it's something where if you're in that situation, if you're in that situation, you still want to be able to write better documentation. They've got some really, really good sort of like, here's how you can write inline documentation that actually gives people the information that they need. It's really, really helpful if you're sort of trying to get better at writing documentation that's actually useful.
Well, all of you know, like my perspective. So if you don't want to watch all these videos about things that change year after year and update, then just spend time on that. SwiftUI combined. Watch something that will stay with you for a couple of years, like security or privacy. Watch the session about Apple privacy pillars. About the main principles. Watch the session about anti-fraud, about fraud detection, how to make your application more secure with app attest API, right? Watch about passwordless authentication, a new web authentication standard, basically. I mean, those things or about encryption, those things will live for more than 1 year. and you won't need to rewatch the sessions again and again.
And I think that you just made me think of another session that I watched that I think is in the same line with that. There's a new HTTP instrument that lets you examine sort of how traffic is coming into and going out of your application. It's super useful. And those kind of instruments are things that stick around for a long time. So getting to understand how to better debug and better understand what's going on with your app when it's not doing what you want it to do is really, really helpful.
Yeah, totally.
So my advice isn't about sessions. My advice is to get involved, because you can go and watch the concurrent talks if you want to, and please do. They're very good talks. But for the first time in evolution, a whole batch of proposals have gone into evolution that are tightly interlinked, like almost like an explosion in a spaghetti factory kind of interlinked, right? And that makes them very complicated to understand. But once you get your head around how they work, Apple are not ending those in the regular timeline. Like structured concurrency, for example, should have ended previously, and it's still open and being reviewed because they've asked for, in a massive Swift forums thread, feedback from the community. How has this impacted you? Does this solve the problems you have? How could we change to be better? And so by all means, watch the videos, try it out, but then get involved, because it is still very much in flux. And you could see that in the WWDC videos, where they kept on calling async some code, and that's all deprecated now. That's all gone away and replaced with a task API. That's only a week ago the WW talks have been released, and now they're out of date already because it's moving so very quickly. So I would encourage folks, please get involved, read what's happening at the very least, and maybe if you want to, contribute your own ideas as well, because it really does matter.
There have been a couple of people who pointed this out on Twitter as well, but like, file bugs early. The earlier that you file a feedback on something, the more likely it is to be addressed in the first version of iOS that comes out after in the fall, just because of how much stuff they kind of have to lock down and only do like serious bug fixes on in the summer. So if you've got something where you're like, it would be really nice if it did this other thing, like, get that request in right now.
I'm not sure folks necessarily realize the latency of these Xcode releases. Like beta 2 is already done, right? That's already happened. We haven't seen it yet, but it's already frozen. It's happened and ready to ship next week, probably. Beta 3 is almost being finished right now. It's probably almost is finished at this point. So if you find a bug today, the absolute earliest it might get resolved is beta 4, and that's they're working it very quickly. Talking more like beta 6 or so. So please file your bugs now. Honestly, in about 4 weeks, it won't get fixed before the final version ships in September. So hurry up with your bug reports.
That's a great advice. Test your app early and file bugs. Yeah, couldn't agree more. Well, I think that's it. I think we have reached the end. So, well, first thing I have to say is thank you to everyone in the panel for joining me. So thank you, Hélène, Anastasia, Donny, and Paul. It was super nice to have this discussion. Thanks to everyone also in the audience who attended and who actually actively participated, because the questions, they are what make this session much more alive and engaging. If you missed some part, there will be a replay, so it will be available on Bitrise YouTube channel. So sometime next week, so you can already go follow the Twitter account and or the YouTube channel, so you're notified when it's available. And I think I've just got to say, well, thank you everyone. Have a great evening, rest of your day, depending on where you are in the world. And hope to see everyone back, maybe before next WWDC. Maybe at an in-person event. Let's just dream about it.
Sounds good.
I'm gonna be at 360 iDev in person, so
I think it's going to be swiftly for my part.
Cool. See you guys around soon.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye, puppy.
Bye, puppies.